my great pleasure to introduce this man this morning, Sam Tarascio. Sam Salvatore Tarascio is the founder and executive chairman of Salta Properties, one of Australia's largest private companies and a name synonymous with the changing face of modern Melbourne and increasingly other parts of Australia as well. Having emigrated from Italy in the 1950s, Sam started out in industrial property and has since transformed his enterprise from a logistics business into an integrated property development business spanning all major sectors. I don't like this, but with a net worth estimated by Forbes at $1.2 billion, is that right or wrong?
Oh, they never get their facts straight.
Salta Properties' extensive interests include Preston Market, Victoria Gardens Shopping Centre, Nexus Corporate, Tribe Hotels, Tarolinga Estate, olive oil, we'll talk about olive oil later. Extra virgin olive oil, and many other things. Would you please welcome Sam Tarascio?
Thank you.
So, now, for those that don't know, I mean, give us a bit of a sense, Sam, in terms of Salta Properties today. Give us a feel for what you guys are doing, and then we might just unpack a little bit in terms of where you've come from.
Well, I mean, the Salta Properties effectively started before our logistics business, which you may know grew to be a very large business, and it accelerated in property as a result of the success of the logistics business, where it started to do all the warehousing requirements, the logistics requirements for what was then known as Westgate Logistics. So its beginnings were fairly humble. They were fairly simple buildings, the sort of stuff that I could manage very, very easily because I don't actually have qualifications to be a builder, although I have a builder's licence. So the buildings have to be fairly simple, and they were in those days. Just
like many builders out there.
Well, I've probably got a lot of friends out there, I'd say. So that really was the beginning of Salta, and as we evolved and as we innovated in terms of industrial buildings, which in those days were really at the very low end of the property market. Generally standalone buildings in very untidy areas that really reflected nothing but an industry that was so low in its capacity to pay rent. We changed that and we started to create, off the back of what Westgate needed, we started to create industrial parks. So we created parks where we kept the warehousing, did all the management, did all the landscaping, because notwithstanding that it's a tenant's obligation to do the landscaping, they don't do it. So we took all that off them. And the first industrial park of any quality in Victoria was a Salta one in the western suburb of Altona.
So, I mean, the interesting thing, and fellas, we've got to sort the sound out, and I'll just yell in the interim. So, I mean, the interesting thing about logistics is that, I mean, you've been able to build this business in logistics, which is the most unglamorous of the real estate sectors. But the thing that's really interesting about it is that it's such an important part of the way that cities operate, and you've been able to find a very, very kind of sexy element to logistics. And so I'm just interested, before we actually jump into sort of your journey, I'm interested, Salta Properties today, just tell us exactly what you've got out there.
Well, Salta Properties today is a company that goes right across the broad spectrum of property. We're involved in, as you mentioned before, we're involved in commercial, industrial, retail, residential, and hotels. We don't necessarily build across the spectrum. We started off building warehouses, but we've now actually stopped being a builder full stop because the resource for the amount of money that we would save was not worth it. And we now give the jobs to builders and just supervise a builder. But we're doing, and the one I left out was built to rent. So we're in every sector of property, as distinct from when we started, where we were only really in industrial property.
And so you, I think we're good now, Sam. You started out
Do I
as...
need this? I still need this.
I think you still need that, yeah. Apologies. So, I mean, you lived an extraordinary life through property, and I think it all began with sort of the migrant journey and the migrant story. And so tell us a little bit about, you know, Sam, your upbringing, what you've sort of experienced in Australia from a young age, and tell us about yourself as a younger person.
How long have you got?
36 minutes and 58 seconds.
There's the time there, okay. That's fine. Well, I mean, my father migrated in 1949. My mother and myself and my brother migrated in 1950 on a 35-day journey on what you would call a surfboard. Because if you look at ships these days that have got 1,000 passengers, they come in at about 100,000 tonne. The ship that we came in, which was a converted Greek freighter with bunk beds, there were no cabins, and there was no mixed bunk beds, by the way, but people behaved, I think, was all of 7,500 tonnes. So you just relate that to the 100,000 tonnes of today for the same number of passengers, and you'll understand the sort of journey we had. A lot of people, or when I say a lot, most people got seasick. Some people died. They were put into a Hessian bag and they were thrown overboard. There was no medical facilities. There was no morgue type facilities for corpses. And so as a 5-year-old, I had exposure to all of this. I saw people being thrown overboard. So the trip was fairly horrendous. Arrived in Australia in 1950, taken down to Werribee, which in those days, Werribee in Victoria, for those of you who are not Victorians, and in those days Werribee was just a hamlet, so we really didn't know where we thought we were going to the end of the earth. Arrived at Werribee, St Joseph's School, which was my next step, plonked in the middle of about 30 students. Nobody could speak Italian, and I couldn't speak a word of English. So the first year, effectively, I grappled with the difficulty of learning the language and trying to sort of understand the academic elements they were trying to teach me, which I couldn't understand what they were talking about. So that was a fairly tough call.
So it gave you some pretty thick skin, gave you some resilience as you were growing up?
Well, I think it gave you a determination to be the equal of your peers and to try and integrate as quickly as possible.
And I hear you're a pretty good soccer player.
Well, yeah, in later years, once we moved out of Werribee, we moved virtually to the city in Altona, which we thought was the city. And as I progressed, I started to play soccer at the technical school that I was in. And yes, I had some fairly good success. I played for the Victorian schoolboy team that toured New South Wales. I played for a club called Sunshine City, and then I was recruited by a club called Hakoah, which was the Jewish team in Melbourne playing at the top league. At Hakoah, I really got an appreciation of the capacity for people to be in business, because everybody I met there within the Jewish fraternity that were on the committee had businesses.
Yeah.
So it was a very early exposure to, if they can do it, I can do it.
Now, your first deal, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting first deals I've ever seen or ever heard of in my life. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I suppose the very first deal that we did was I had a number of jobs. So unfortunately, I need to have a bit of a lead up on this, but when I left school, I worked for, I left at school at 16. I worked for Myer as a cadet salesperson. I went from there to Hilton Hosiery, selling hosiery to boutique stores in the city, which on reflection was a pretty good job actually. So, my mother was horrified that I was selling hosiery, being of Italian origin and so strict, but she sort of accepted it, but was delighted when my next job was with a medical company as a medical rep, because she went from being horrified to being delighted that I was teaching doctors what to do, in her mind.
In her mind.
So I started with a company called Laboratories, which made diagnostic strips for testing urine and blood sugar. I went from there to a company called Herxt, who were a major pharmaceutical company, but a major industrial company that were manufacturing polypropylene and polyethylene. So that's the plastic granules that you extrude and make all sorts of things with. And that's where I got my first exposure to the fact that some of these major companies, or I thought they all owned their own facilities in total, but I was informed by Herx that they actually leased the warehouse facilities that they were occupying. So being part of the company and working with them, I made some inquiries on rental and lease terms and figured that here's an opportunity. So that was the opportunity that I signalled out before I started business.
So you've identified the fact that your employer needs some warehouse space, and then subsequently gone out and bought a block of land and said back to your employer.
Well, they didn't actually need it because they were in warehousing, but they were in warehousing that was owned by government, and it was the typical old wool sheds that you see around, which were all full of asbestos, and obviously in those days nobody worried about the asbestos. They didn't have good loading facilities, so my approach was to go to the company secretary and say, look, I think I can build you a brand new facility for the same rent that you're paying in the wool shed. I'd got the rent from within the company, and his answer was, if you can do that, then we'll lease it, and we'll exit what we're in, which was very, very simple. I mean, I hadn't built a building in my life, but I figured that I could go and build a building. So that was the start.
And so I from reading your book, and I encourage anyone to read Sam's book, it's a fascinating read. You bought a pretty ordinary block of land from the sound of it.
Yeah. Well, before the Herx thing happened, and once I got an understanding of warehousing, I actually went out and bought some land very early in the piece. I'd met a young lady that I was very keen on, and she was eventually going to become my wife. She's sitting in the audience tonight. And my father had bought a block of land in a swamp to expand his small business, which was a garden supply business. I figured that I should buy everything around it just in case I needed to go in and take over the business. So it was a 1920s subdivision that had no provision for drainage or sewerage or anything else. So, and most people that owned it didn't even realise that they owned them.
Right.
So we got it at a very cheap price. It was cheap as chips, quite frankly, and I accumulated about, I can't remember now, but it might have been 2 acres. And so before the Herx deal actually came to life, I went next door where there was a transport company and got a pre-lease from Main Nicholas to build them a warehouse on this piece of land because it was so close to their depot. The problem was the land was rubbish, so I had to get it filled. I needed money, so by filling it, I actually revalued it at something like 10 times the value that I'd paid for it. So I had an equity position. I borrowed my dad's house, and I built a warehouse for Main Nicholas. So that gave me the experience and gave Herx the comfort to say, righto, go for it.
Go for it. And then from what I understand, you did it again and again.
Well, what I did was, once I'd built the main Nicholas warehouse, I sold that off, capitalised it, and sold it off, and made a pretty good profit for those days. And having the Hercs warehouse ready to go to, used that money as equity to do the Hercs warehouse. But this time I bought decent land that had drainage and sewage and all the commodities, and able to fit 3 of the warehouses that I'd built. So it was a complex. So I built the first one for Hercs, the second one on spec, and the third one again for Hercs. And that was really the start of the property business, but also the start of the logistics business, because I figured that if I built the warehouse, Hercs were using a contractor that had clapped out trucks, old trucks. They'd been doing the work for years. They'd never thought that they would lose the work, so they weren't looking for innovation. And I convinced Hercs to allow me to buy a truck. I don't have a truck licence, but I went out and bought a couple of trucks. I bought a forklift, and I started in logistics.
And so, I mean, it's a really, really difficult thing to try and, like, you know, I guess pump up logistics. It doesn't sound like the most exciting sector. But what was it about logistics and industrial property that really kind of fascinated you? Why?
I think the fascination to me has always been that I've wanted to be in business.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter what business. And so the opportunities really pass us all by on a daily basis. The skill is to be able to identify an opportunity and grab it as it comes, because once it passes by, it never comes back. So there was nothing special about logistics that excited me other than being in business. But having done that, and now having been in logistics, the logistics business strongly fueled the Salta business. And as I became more and more experienced in construction, because it's not hard to do, if you're there on site all the time, you can see what happens, you can see how to construct things. Be it the warehousing that we were doing was fairly simple, it was still a good grounding for me to move on. So subsequent to that, we started to develop industrial parks elsewhere, and then I suppose one of the real turning points was when I bought some land in Richmond, which was the Ajax Fastener building, and it was in a prime location next to the river and over the road from the blue chip suburbs of Hawthorn and Kew, on the basis that I could do a development that was an integrated development of shopping centres, retail and commercial. It's the very mix that today people are looking for that we contemplated doing back 20 years ago.
20 years ago. Now, I think your friend Barry Plant, who's here, a very well-known real estate agent and businessman in his own right, described you just before as the greatest visionary he's ever seen, and he warned me not to give you a piece of paper because you'll just sit there drawing all over it. What was your vision for that site in Richmond, and then what did it become?
Well, first of all, Barry's over-complimentary, let me tell you. But well, the vision was, you know, the vision was that we believed that on that site, and we had to sort of aggregate the site. So the site that I bought was nowhere near the size of the site that after I'd finished aggregating, I got to. But we got to control 120,000 square metres of land, 5 kilometres from the city, sitting on the River Yarra, abutting Hawthorn and Kew, the blue chip areas. So what do? We went through a lot of machinations, whether we could bring boats up the river and all sorts of things. And of course our river, being the River Yarra, is not the sort of rivers that you have up here. It's, in a relative sense, it's a bit of a canal. So, but it's water to us. Yeah. So what we thought we would do, because the area was changing, people were moving in, that were they weren't blue-collar workers anymore. They were educated people, that the area was changing into a very sought-after area. People believe we could never do it, but we went for a shopping centre, and we went for a permit that was a complete permit that allowed us the ability to do retail, residential and commercial. And we figured, and our motto actually 20 years ago was live, work and play at Victoria Gardens. So live in an apartment, play in the shopping centre and work in a commercial building.
Yep.
And today, that is exactly what that is. It is probably the biggest or one of the biggest urban renewal projects. We've still got 10 years to go after 20 years. Shopping centre is performing exceptionally well. It's a different shopping centre to your normal retail. We are wanting to concentrate more on people attractor type activities. That is, things that people have to come to the centre for health, such as we've got medical precinct, we've got we're going to be putting in childcare. So, because I think that retail is going to have some difficult years, in particular with the fashion, where people can buy online. But if you're using it as a community centre, you know, the baby health centre could be there, childcare is there, the medical is there, right? These are all people attractor type activities that keep that centre going. And we have now Vicinity as a partner. We brought Vicinity in when they were the Centro Group as our joint venture partner. And if you look at the performance of our centre on a graph, it is the highest performing centre within that Vicinity group.
Right. So, mate, you've done a lot of projects,
Yeah.
And we could talk about them all day, and trust me, I do want to. But we don't have the time. So let's talk about the really, really special moments, but special projects or special moments within your career, Sam. What's stood out as a special moment or project?
Well, look, I think when you come from nothing and you're undercapitalised and you do any project, the project is special. So there's an awful lot of special projects. But if you look at the projects that have really been of substance and innovative, then the office parks, we were the first to do it. Then we had Goodman's come in and all the other major businesses with lots and lots of cash. So we pulled away from industrial to a degree because the margins weren't there anymore and the competition was too great. But we did. It was one of our first major, I suppose, flag-waving developments where we had an industrial park that was totally controlled by us, and it was a picture to look at. The lawns were always mowed. The tenants were always very happy because we were doing the work for them, and people could come to the estate and not feel that they were in a dirty industrial estate, which had been the case. That was a, you know, quite a in my view, an outcome that warrants being one of the very early achievements. But the real achievement is Victoria Gardens.
Yep.
Victoria Gardens today is a huge development that, when it's complete in maybe 10 years' time, because it's taking that long, but it's at an enormous scale now, will probably have a value of maybe $1.5 billion, and it's well on the way to doing that.
Right.
And it's interesting that now the mix of activities that we were thinking about 20 years ago have become the rule for mixed-use projects.
So you do a lot of different things now as well. I mean, you've got residential, you've got commercial, you've got industrial, hotels. What have I missed? Something else. But you're able to sit across many different markets and many different sectors. What's guiding your view and your judgment about which sectors to pursue and what to pursue? Because it's there's not that many people that do have the same kind of exposure to many different sectors that you do. So how are you sort of what's influencing your decision making about those?
Well, I think the fact that we're across every sector really allows us to accelerate in the sector that is working at the time and slow down in a sector that is not working at the time. And so because we're so broad-based, we can cope with the changing position of most of these sectors. As an example, today residential is very soft in Melbourne, but and again it depends on how your structure is. But we know the population growth in Melbourne. We know that in 2 years' time there's going to be a shortage of apartments. We know that the banks have tightened up and closed up, so many developers, which are the developers that really rely on project by project and putting the profit of that project into another project, can't actually get funding. We're doing 540 apartments on the banks of the river, in Richmond again, which has all the amenities, such as the shopping centre, the tram that goes into the city that will take 5 minutes to get into the city, the river, the walking tracks, and we're doing it off balance sheet, right? And I believe that that off the plan is really started to sour, because too many people now have had experiences of buying something off the plan that on brochure looks like a palace. When they get to it, it looks like a dog box. It is a dog box. So we're very happy that there is a difficulty in getting funding, because it allows us to, I would always prefer to build a building and then sell the building to people who can come and look at what the product is worth. Because my biggest problem is someone comes in and says, down the road, you know, they're $200 a square metre cheaper than you are. And I say, yes, but I'm going to give you quality. Yes, I know, but there's still $200 a metre cheaper. And so there's no way of measuring. There's no way of that buyer really understanding the differences in the quality. So I'd prefer to build it, let them come in, let them look at the quality, and then hopefully get a few more dollars than I would otherwise get.
God, I can't wait to be in your position.
We're doing that at Victoria Gardens.
It's amazing. So how close to the detail are you? Do you review the plans? Do you sit there with the interior designers? How close to the detail are you?
Well, as you know, my son is the managing director, and obviously I've put in place an appropriate management system, and I need to respect the protocol that goes with good management. So the business has an external board, it has a managing director, but it has one shareholder, which is me. So what I've got to do is discipline myself and not go in and underscore management, undermine management by me approaching some of our employees direct, and also abide by the ruling that the board decides that the business should go. And we've got some very experienced people, because that's really the only way that an intergenerational aspect can happen, where the next generation takes over. What is my involvement? It's very much directional. At the very early stages, I have a very good eye for spatial elements of the building, how it flows and how it should flow, whether it be retail or whether it be residential or certainly warehousing. I know warehousing backwards to the degree that I not only built the warehouses early in my life, but I also used to run them, so I know the difficulty of something that is badly built. So I do all of that still, and I'm still in the office every day. And then the team takes over.
So family business is an interesting thing. It's an honour and a privilege, but at the same time can be very challenging. You've got all 3 children in the business, or
no,
two
no,
of the 3?
I've got 2.
Two?
I've got Sam, who's the managing director, and David, who's in charge of Salta Capital. And he does property development as well, but the smaller development that fly under the radar of the main business.
Yep.
And also our technology investments.
Yep.
And then my daughter, who did work for me, she's a property lawyer, but now is married and she's got 3 kids. And so she's effectively not in the business, but has been developing a technology business with her husband, who's also a lawyer. So they've got their own business now going, separate from our main business.
And what's it like to have your children in the business and think about succession planning and what's, you know, what the future holds for your organisation and your legacy? How do you manage that process?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to have my kids there, but I think every father should understand that putting your son in as to run the business is a high risk position, because if in fact that person can't reach the standards that the business is needed, then there's only one outcome. This needs to be replaced. And you can imagine within a family, if that sort of thing was to happen, how difficult that would be to navigate.
So do you talk about business on Sunday lunch and those sorts of things, or you keep it separated?
I talk about business every day of the week, but I think in these days we have a balance that needs to be maintained, what they call a life-work balance, which I can't find in the dictionary, but I really have to abide by it. So unless something is absolutely urgent, then no, we don't talk about it when we're socially together. I've got grandkids to look after, and I refrain from doing it. But
how hard is it? Is it very, very hard to have a family business?
No, I think fortunately for me, both my sons are absolutely amazing in their capacity, and the business is exploding. We probably have a pipeline of over $5 billion in total over the whole property sector. We can't keep up with the approaches that are made to us to join with other people to do projects.
Yep.
But we still have a private business restriction to the degree that we have to put seed capital into all of our projects, because that's just the way that the whole thing works. Well, we exhaust our seed capital very, very quickly. There's so many projects coming through because we're across the whole spectrum of property that our biggest problem is maintaining the ability to put in the seed capital.
So what do you look for in new opportunities, Sam? So you've got so many opportunities presenting yourself. You've got every punter coming to you asking to joint venture for things. What is your criteria for looking at something and saying, that's a good one, that's an ordinary one?
Well, look, I mean, if they're ordinary, well, the criteria...
Let's assume they all stack up.
Well, if they all stack up, obviously, I've always been one that I want the highest profile sites, and I want to put the quality that I can go back to and be proud of the building that I've built. I don't want to do a building just for the profit. I don't have to do a building just for the profit. And, you know, some of the stuff that I see happening, you wouldn't go back and say you had anything to do with it. So my criteria is it's got to be a good quality product and still stack up, and something that we can be proud of, because I think Salta over the years has now developed a branding in Victoria that is very, very high, and it's well recognised as being a serious developer that people can trust, and that's what I want to keep in place.
What are the principles by which you run your organisation? You know, how do you define your success within your business?
How do I define the business success?
Yeah.
I suppose that is on the outcome of the project, and on the acceptability of that project within the market. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's any other element to it. You got your
Let's get your perspective on a few different things, because I know you're doing some pretty innovative things out there that are very different to what most of us are doing at the moment. You're one of the pioneers in this country on build to rent in terms of actually doing something,
Yeah.
not just talking about it.
Yeah.
Tell us what you're doing in that space.
Well, we're about to kick off a couple of projects on build to rent. I suppose my view of build to rent is probably not the common view. I think society is changing in terms of what people want. These days, people are getting married a lot later. You know, most people are going into their 30s before they decide to settle down. And so the sort of build to rent that I want to build is the accommodation that these people want prior to sort of taking out their mortgage and settling down to a lifestyle with a family. So these are dual income earners, possibly earning up to $500,000-$600,000 a year. They want a lifestyle on a temporary basis where they can lock up and go and explore the world until they're ready to settle down. So our build to rent will be focused on getting the very best locations and providing the very best amenity and providing long-term leases to people that want to be there. As you know, most rentals these days are 12-month rentals. There's no long-term. We're happy to sort of commit to a long-term lease with a fixed percentage rental so that people understand exactly where they're going. And if the market spikes, that's fine. We will have done our numbers on what we believe we can make pay. And so people can actually have an equity build-up in their long-term rental if the market has spiked and the cost of apartments has gone up in terms of rental. If they want to opt out of that, they could sublease that and they could actually make a margin. But I think the main thing that we're concerned about is giving people security that they have, if they like the location, they like the amenity, they like the building, they want to stay there. At the moment, nobody has tenure, 12 months. We hope that our rental people will have tenure.
Let's talk about olive oil. You're very passionate about this, and I've heard that in the Melbourne restaurant scene, you're the don of olive oil.
Oh.
It's as good as it gets. Tell us about Tarolinga Estate and why you're doing that.
It's a great tax deduction. And you know, just briefly, I'm not sure that everybody is all that interested in olive oil, but you know, we bought a beautiful property on the peninsula in Melbourne. You know, there's the usual difficulties with farming properties. You've got to farm them, or you pay land tax that's outrageous. So my grandfather used to do olive oil in Sicily. So rather than putting in grapes, we put in olive trees. We brought out a plant from Italy that is the Rolls-Royce, stainless steel. Takes about half a day to process all of my product and could probably process the product of the whole peninsula. But it produces fantastic oil. And so there's a sequence to producing oil, which if you do it right, you will create, or you will make the best antioxidant food that you can just about buy, because the antioxidant levels of olive oil, if you do it the right way, are very, very high, and they're the health-giving benefits. And it doesn't exist in most of the oils that are on the market that are being sold, because they're not produced with the same rigour that you can produce within a boutique environment. Right. As an example, olive oil is actually a fruit. One of the critical things is, as soon as you pick that fruit, it starts to deteriorate, because that's just the way it happens. So the time between picking and processing is absolutely important, because as it deteriorates, it loses its antioxidants. We process our olives within 4 hours of being picked, right? The only perfect position would be, that could beat that, taking it from the plant and putting it into the machine, which can't happen. But within 4 hours of picking, we try and get our product into the machine to retain all the benefits of the olive oil. And so we've just won gold in New York, which is the biggest show in the world, the biggest competition in the world. And if you win gold in New York, you get listed on the world's best oils. Is it of any benefit in trying to sell it? Not really, because you can't get that awareness out, but it's great satisfaction to know you've got the best olive oil in the world. Great tax deduction. We give it away as corporate gifts. People love it. We give them an explanation of how good it is. And effectively, it's a great aid to the business.
Modular hotels. Tell us about what you're doing in that space. That's pretty interesting with Tribe Hotels.
Well, Tribe really is David, my son's area of activity. But fair to say that recently that business has been sold. Half of it was sold to Accor, 51%, and it's a young person's hotel, which really concentrates on having great technology, no extras, nothing for the minibar, but small rooms and communal areas where people get together for breakfast and can interact. And it's really for the mobile executive who can't afford to pay the $400 that you might need in a more sophisticated hotel. But a lot of that money is because the hotel has to pay for the pool and the gym and all these sorts of things. These people are the people that don't stay in hotels. They want a bed to sleep in, they want all the IT facilities, they want breakfast, and then they're out on the town. And there's a brand in Europe called Citizen M, which started a few years ago, and it's just gone wildfire right through Europe. And Citizen M is the same format as what our Tribe Hotel. So it's a young hotel. Our rates are about between $150 and $200 a night. Everything is included, and there's great interaction between the people that are staying there. But they're boutique, they're small hotels, 100 rooms, 120 rooms. They're not major hotels. And Accor has seen fit to sort of buy 51%, and they're going to be putting them right through Europe.
Right.
And
these are prefabricated modular
They're
units?
prefabricated modular units that just go up. Yeah, they're effectively like a big shipping container that just fits together on a podium. Mm-hmm. So you do your podium on a traditional way in concrete, and then you put these modules over the top. They work very well. They're very cost effective. We can do a hotel of 120 rooms in about 6 months.
Fascinating.
Because that's just the way it works.
So what's next for you, mate? We're almost out of time. Mm-hmm. What you obviously get the office every day. I think you said you're working more than 40 hours a week, which is still fascinating. What's next, and what's the next 10, 20 years hold for you?
Well, we've got a pipeline where we will be around for a long time to commit to that pipeline. But one of the things that I haven't mentioned, it'll take probably a little bit more than the time we've got, is that we are the main proponents to inland ports. And inland ports is actually a combination of property and logistics. Yeah. And effectively, ports are a lifeblood of the state. So, and generally a port is located central to the state because major cities grow around ports. The problem with that is that as the city grows and grows, and the volume of containers that come in off that port continually grow to feed the growth of the city and everything else that people want, it becomes a hindrance to the amenity around the port, and the efficiency of the port drops. So we are behind the move where we have located, in Victoria we have 3 hinterlands. We have a northern hinterland, a western hinterland and a southeast hinterland. Then south is water. So by locating what we call inland ports in each of these hinterlands, so that you can pick the containers up at the port by train, 100 at a time, as against an average of 1.1 per truck per container, right, and take it out to the hinterland and then do the final mile distribution from the hinterland, it does a number of things. It takes this massive traffic that is going through the city and up the freeways off the roads. It creates a greater capacity at the port for them to bring in more containers, right? And the final mile distribution then is contained within that hinterland. So it's got enormous social benefits, where at the moment we've got trucks running through suburban areas with containers day and night, day and night. It takes all that difficulty out of the system by, you know, the trains can work at night, they can work during the day, but they don't go on the roads. And that is a major project that I have been working on now for probably 15 or 16 years, dealing with government and trying to get the inertia in government to a degree where, you know, they have to approve us cutting into the main lines. They have to do certain legislative things to help it go through. Yeah. It has bipartisan support in Victoria by both parties, but notwithstanding that bipartisan support, it's like pushing a barrow up a very steep hill. But we are nearly there, and we think we'll do it. And that requires me to, well, what we've done is we've bought large masses of industrial land that are able to be connected by rail. Right. So then there's not that many sites around, because there's not that many sites that can be connected by rail that have rail that is proximate enough to be able to tap in. We have the 3 sites in Melbourne, and hopefully within the next year or 2 we'll be able to get that system going.
That's amazing.
It's property and it's a bit of logistics, which I'm going back into.
And when you think about drone delivery and the way that logistics is going and how important it is for our cities, it's amazing to know that you're very much leading that and pioneering that. So thank you very much for your time, Sam. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wish I could sit here for another hour, mate, and unpack all of this, but unfortunately we are out of time. And would you please thank Mr. Sam Tarascio.